Welcome back to part 2. So we're going to take one of our main coloured wool bats now. I'm just going to take a strip and I'm going to place the strip in between the legs of our scarecrow, and I'm just going to tack that down with my fine twisted needles here. Get it all secured into place. And then we're going to wrap the first piece around the leg nearest to me. And I'm just going to wrap it in the same way that we've been wrapping earlier on, but I've just got a much wider piece here now because we've got a wider area to cover, whereas before we were just covering the wires, so we needed a narrow piece. So I'm going to take this all the way down to his kind of ankle area, just before his ankle, and then come back up again. And I'm just teasing it out as I go so I don't get any massive lumps occurring, because we're working with a much wider piece, so it's easier for the fabric, or the fibre, sorry, to sort of twist round and kind of ruche up, I guess. So I'm just going to tack down that piece there and all those loose fibres and just get them nicely locked down. And then I'm just going to felt this down properly and get rid of any lumps and bumps and get it nicely integrated into the rest of the leg. Just make sure you flip him over as well. And you'll probably find that you do get a little bit of blue coming through, but don't worry about that. Then you need to take a second piece, and I'm just going to secure this piece down into the thigh area this time. And then again, we're going to wrap it all the way just down to his knee area now, and then come back up. So we're not going all the way down to where we did before, just to the knee. And again, we're going to felt that down. And you want to get a nice smooth finish here. I'm just going to flip him round. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. So he looks like this. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to felt down another piece of that blue wool bat using your brush tool and your multi-tool. And I'm just going to felt it down into one large section, which is about the same size roughly as the mat, a little bit smaller. And I'm going to fold up one side, okay? You don't need to fold up two sides, just the one side. And I'm just going to felt it on the reverse as well, just to get it all nicely secured down. There we go. Then I'm just going to add a little bit more in, just to create a bit more of a solid colour, because I don't want this to be translucent, I want it to be quite solid. So just going over with your multi-tool again, in an up and down action. And then we're going to do another one of these, so we're going to make two. And this is measuring 5 inches by about 2.5 inches in width, this piece, but yours will depend on how big you want your end of your trousers to be. So now we've made 2 of these, what we're going to do is we're going to take the first one and we're going to place the loose fibre end on around the knee area of his leg. So you've got probably about, I don't know, 2 centimetres exposed of his foot and ankle. And then I'm just going to tack that down. And then what I'm doing here is I'm just ruching slightly the material, because we're going to bring it round his leg, okay? And I'm just going to fold it round the thigh area and felt that down with my fine needles again. And the reason that we're using the loose fibre end to tack it down is because that way you don't see any joins, it all blends in really nice and smoothly. I'm just going to fold over that end there. This is the bit that can be quite tricky now, so you just need to be a bit patient, but what we're going to be doing is felting the two loose ends together, merging them together. So I'm going to felt along the leg again, and then I'm going to flip it around and do the other side. So you can felt some of this into the leg, but we want to keep a lot of it loose to give his trousers that trouser-like look. And then I'm just folding the bottom of the trouser underneath to get a smooth edge. And then I'm just felting those 2 loose ends together so they merge nicely, as you can see here. Be careful if you're felting against the mat doing this, because what you'll find is that they can adhere really easily. So just when you do it, just make sure that you're lifting frequently to stop it from sticking to your mat. And it can take a little while, but eventually you'll get to the stage where everything is lovely and smooth and nicely integrated together. I'm just doing very light stabbing motions randomly around that join area there, because I don't want it to adhere to the leg either. You want to keep this loose. So it might be that you put 2 fingers underneath the leg and just sort of splay your fingers out to stop it from sticking. So that's the first side done. So we're going to do exactly the same thing now on the second side. So I'm just going to hold that in place and start felting it down. And then eventually, once you've felted it all down, it should look like this. So he's got these 2 kind of bell-bottom trousers. So what you want to do next is take a strip of your second main colour, your main coloured wool bat. So I've got my pink here, quite a long strip, because we're going to be using this to wrap around his arms. So I'm going to start off around the back. So I'm going to tack it down over his shoulder, along his back, just to anchor it all into place so it's not going to unravel. I want to get a really secure anchor on this. So I'm just going to spend a bit of time now felting that down and getting under his arm as well. And then I'm going to just bring his arm out, bring the wire out, and then turn this round in the same way that we've been wrapping wool all the way through the tutorial so far. But just make sure that as you do it, your piece isn't too wide like it was with the trousers a moment ago, and that you're keeping it nice and flat and really tight, really, really tight. You want to get as tight a wrap as possible with his arms, because we're going to do lots more with his arms later on. So I'm going for two wraps, so all the way down and then all the way back up again. And then with those loose fibres, I'm just going to felt them down into his shoulder area there. Just get it all tacked down. I'm just checking it just to make sure it's all felting correctly. And then I'm just going to felt under his arm, over the shoulder, and then do the same on the other side. So you've got 2 arms that look like this. There's a bit of looseness there, so I'm just going to get rid of that, felt that down with my fine needles. So he should look like this. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is just check his hands and make sure that they fit nicely on there and they sit so that they're flush with our pink wool that we've just added. So they look good at the moment. I'm happy with that. They're looking pretty cool. They're going to look great once everything's blended in together. You've got all the outfit on. He's going to look really, really good. So I'm just going to move those off now. And I'm just going to felt his arms down a little bit more, just to get them nice and firm, because we want them to be nice and firm so we don't get any unravelling once he's finished. And that's why it's good to use your fine needles, because you can get a much finer felt here rather than using your medium needles, and also you don't get those indentations that you get with your medium needles as well. Okay, so next we want to take 2 slithers of the pink wool bats, and we're going to place these across his torso area. So I'm going to take my first one, I'm just going to felt it down on a diagonal across his torso. So he's going to look a little bit like he's some kind of 70s Donny Osmond style pop star, because he's going to have this kind of open shirt and he's got his bell-bottom trousers anyway, so he's going to look pretty retro, but that's cool. I'm good with retro. So I'm just going to felt down that first side, and then don't worry if it goes onto the blue, because we're going to be adding additional items to our trousers later to cover any kind of colour merge and make his trousers look more authentic as well. So just make sure that you're felting into the side of the torso too, that pink wool bats. So just spin him on his side, and it should be really easy now to do any felting. It shouldn't be difficult in terms of the wire there. You should have no problems at all. And then I'm just flipping him over and then felting down over the shoulder and getting that all neatly felted down nice and firmly. And just make sure that you move any excess off the neck, because we don't want anything on the neck at the moment. Spin him round, And then I always find the shoulder tends to be an area where you get quite a bit of looseness, so really focus on the shoulder. So it should look like this, and we're going to do the same thing now on the other side as well. So you want to have this kind of triangular shape formed on the torso like this. So it should look like this, and then I'm just going to flip him over and I'm going to pop some more pink on his back area. And I'm just pulling the pink apart and then layering it on top of each other to create a thicker piece, so we don't have any transparency in terms of the back of his shirt. We don't see any brown once it's all added. And I'm just going to again felt that down, but making sure I've got that nice straight line around the neck area. Really focusing on those difficult nooks and crannies where you're going to get that looseness and your fibre's going to potentially become a little bit woolly and the fibres are going to come out. So make sure you really focus on those difficult areas. And then I'm just going to felt that down into his back. So eventually it should look like this. I'm just going to felt down that side bit there as well. Integrate that into what we've already added. Like so. And then what we want to do next is we want to create a shirt opening. So we're making his shirt look more realistic. So what you want to do is grab your brush mat in, and then you want to get a piece of pink wool bats. We're going to fold over one side, keep one side loose with the fibres, and you want this to be about 6.5 inches in length, and then width-wise you want it to be about 1/4 to 3/4 of an inch in its thickness. It doesn't matter too much if it's a bit thicker, but you want to aim for that really. So I'm just going to bring over our scarecrow, and we're going to place this over his shirt to create more of an opening. So I'm going to hold it there, see if that works. Just getting the right position here. That looks good. So then what we're going to do is we're going to take our scissors and we are going to snip it in half. Move that brush mat out the way. Bring in my felting mat. We're going to place this over his shoulder and we're going to felt. We're going to bring it so that it's just past where we felted last time, ever so slightly. So we can't see what we've already felted down. And then I'm going to felt that into position, leaving that opening unfelted. Okay, we don't want that bit to be felted because that's going to be, so it gives us more of an impression that he's wearing a shirt. So just going in with my fine needles now. And we're just felting in exactly the same way that we did a moment ago when we were adding the beginnings of our shirt. It's just that you want to make sure that it goes over his shoulder as well, because we want that integration. And you can't see here because my hand's in the way, but what I'm doing is bringing my needles inside the shirt and felting what we've just added sort of away to create more of that gap, more of that opening for his shirt. I'm just going to felt the back as well. And then I'm going to do the same with the other side. So just bring that across and then felt that down into position. So now he looks like this. So the shirt's looking a little bit more realistic. I'm just going to felt around his shoulders a bit more and just get those a bit neater. So he looks a bit more natural, but that's looking good. Right, so the next thing to do is just give him a bit more of a felt all over. I'm just going to get any of those. The armpits tend to be an area of problem in terms of getting a nice solid felt. So really make sure that you focus on those underarms too. And feel free to lift his arms up like I'm doing here and just felt underneath, because that's an area that can be missed and forgotten about sometimes. Okay, so he's looking pretty good. He's looking nice and neat. So I'm going to flip him over again. And I'm just going to add a bit more around that back area where his brown's still exposed. Now the reason that I've covered his body in brown and I've not just left the core wool is because at the time that I was doing this, I wasn't sure what bits of him would be exposed. So I decided it would be safer to cover him in the brown wool bats, and that way if anything was showing, it would be kind of brown twig rather than white core wool. So that was my reasoning for covering him all in brown. But there's certain areas that you could just leave it as core wool, but to be honest with you, it's easier to cover it in brown, because otherwise then you're having to leave gaps. You don't know how big a gap you need to leave, and it just gets a bit complicated. So I would just stick with covering him in the brown core wool, and your life will be made easy. So I'm just going to take a bit of the blue and I'm just going to cover over that area on his back and get that all felted down. So we've got more of a divide between his shirt and his trousers. And spin him round, get those sides round. But it just needs to be a piece of wool. It doesn't need to be felted down beforehand at this time, because we're going to create a top half of his trouser in a second. And then just do the same on the other side. There we are. Just get that nice and smooth. Cool. So next we're going to bring our brush mat back in. And we're going to make his collar next. So I'm just going to felt down another piece, a similar size, a little bit shorter to the one we used a moment ago to do his shirt. I'm just going to felt that down in the same way. It's really cool how doing this can add and create a much more realistic look to clothing when you're adding it in felting. Just spin him round. Okay, that's looking okay. It's looking about right. So what I'm going to do is just take that away, and I'm just going to felt that now that I've positioned his shirt collar down with my multi-tool. So I'm creating more of that angular collar shape that we would want. I'm just going to place it over the shoulders of our scarecrow. I've got all this excess here as well, so I'm just going to trim that away. So we've got a circular shape, like so. And then I'm going to place it around his neck. And then holding it into place, I'm going to take my fine needles again and I'm going to felt that down. But I want to leave the bottom half this time loose. So I'm going to felt around the neck area, the top of the neck area, and get it all felted down against our neck that we've made using my fine twisted needles. But I'm going to leave that bottom bit loose, okay? Because I want, again, it to have that realism to it if it's an actual shirt. So I'm just felting down those little tricky areas. Sorry, the camera's struggling to focus here. And whilst he's a pumpkin scarecrow, I think he's an all year round figurine really, because, you know, he's got that real fantasy vibe to him. You can imagine him being given as a gift to someone on their birthday who's really into Halloween, or someone that's into fantasy and magic. He's an all-rounder. Obviously he suits Halloween perfectly, which is why I'm doing a tutorial for you this weekend, but I think he's one of those sculptures that you can make and he'll be appreciated whatever time of year it is. So I'm just going to flip him around. I'm just working on the back of his collar here. And then we're going to create some lines where a shirt collar would normally have lines as well. So I'm just going to go in with my needles side by side and create that line that you would get. Oh wow, if he wasn't looking 70s before, he certainly is now. So I'm just going to go in again around the back area and do the same thing, create that line so that it follows all the way around to the front of the collar. And it can take a bit of time to do, but I think it's really, really important that you spend a bit of time on these little areas, because these small things really do add to the overall sculpture and give it that really lovely professional look to it. And these kind of sculptures I find very satisfying. Whilst they are kind of the sculptures that take longer to make, they're a lot more detailed. The final result's so great. Feels like a real accomplishment once you've done it. So now I'm going to take some more of my blue wool bats. Again, I'm going for the same length as my brush mat, so 6 inches. And I'm going to felt a piece that is about 1.5 inches in width. Again, with one side that's folded over, and then the other side I'm leaving with the fibres nice and loose. And this is going to form the top of our trousers. I'm just going to fold it over and get it nice and solid. And then whilst I'm here, I'm also going to make some cuffs for our shirt. So I'm taking 2 strips of pink. They want to be about the same length. And then the length of my brush mat, which is about 3.5 inches, 4 inches. But you can always trim them to size if they're too long, because your sculpture will vary in size to my sculpture. So what works for mine now may not be the right size for yours. Just go with what works on your sculpture. Don't feel like you have to stick rigidly to the measurements I'm using here. Because even if you've measured out your armature in the same way that I've done mine, things can still change size and look different. So that's the joy of needle felting. Everything turns out differently. So don't worry if you need to use a slightly bigger or shorter piece. So I'm just going to place that first piece that we made sort of round about so that the fibres around the crotch area of him. I'm going to felt all those loose fibres down, and I'm leaving about 1 centimetre loose of that straight area that I felted. So I'm just felting it into his back, going all the way around, felting it all into his bottom area. And then once I've felted that first piece, I'm going to fold over that other piece like so. And I'm just going to felt that down as well over the top. I'm not too worried if there's a bit more bulk here, that's fine. I'm just going to felt those 2 pieces together. And then making sure I've felted all of those loose pieces so we get a nice smooth transition from the piece we've just added down to the trousers that we've already got in place. So I'm just going in with my needles, catching any loose areas. So that's looking pretty good. And then I'm going to add my cuffs. So I'm going to take these so that I've got probably about 1 centimetre of the wire exposed. You want to have wire exposed because it's going to make life really difficult for you when you come to add your hands in a minute. So make sure you have some of that wire exposed. And I'm just going to felt in the same way as we did with the trousers a moment ago, the cuffs. But the only difference here is it's a much smaller surface area, so it's a bit more tricky in that sense, but it is the same principle. But just take your time. If it's a bit tricky, just take your time, don't rush it, because I always say if you rush something, that's when we make mistakes, and it takes a lot longer to correct the mistake than it does just to take your time initially and get it right the first time. So I'm just felting up some of this cuff here. So I'm getting more of a straight edge, and I'm just felting around what would be his kind of forearm as well, against the wall that we've already added. I'm not sort of going anywhere near that exposed wire. And just tidying up that cuff area, felting those 2 pieces together. But again, make sure you just keep lifting it if you're doing that, so that you don't end up with your sculpture adhering to your brush mat. And then I'm just felting a sort of a slightly shorter line around the end of the cuff, if that makes sense. Probably not a very good explanation, but you can see on the video what I mean. With my needles pushing that end away. So you should eventually have something that looks like this. So I'm going to do the same thing with the other arm now and add it in exactly the same way. So then you should have your arms and your trousers all added. So the next thing to do is add his hands. So I'm going to take my super glue. I've got my Gorilla Glue here, but like I said at the beginning of part 1, you can use whatever super glue you want, whichever one works best for you. And I'm just going to felt that down. Sorry, not felt it down. I'm so used to saying felt it down. Glue it down. So I'm just placing a little bit on the end of his wire, exposed wire, and then placing his hand onto the wire. There we go. And then the same on the other side. A little bit of glue on the end of the wire, just to ensure it sticks down. Don't use too much because you'll find because it's a really narrow surface area for the wire, it will drip onto things. So when you're doing this, make sure you're doing it on something that you don't mind getting glue on as well. Many a time I've got super glue on surfaces and then thought, oh no, it's ruined forever. So yeah, just do it on a surface you don't mind getting glue on. So the final thing to do is wrap his arms and his legs with the jute string. So I've got my jute string here, so I'm just going to take off a length, and you want a reasonable amount of jute string, and we're going to add it to the areas where we've joined the bottoms of the trousers and the shirt cuffs or the shirt sleeves. So I'm going to add my first piece to my arm, and I'm going to go for a few turns of the string just to make it look like his stick arm is being really held into place by that string. And once I've gone for a few wraps, I'm just going to tie it in a knot just to secure it so that if I do sell this sculpture, I know that he's not going to come undone or anything like that. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing with his other arm and his legs. And then once that's done, that is part 2 of the tutorial finished. So I hope you found that an enjoyable part of the tutorial. I hope you found it easy to follow. Tomorrow I'll be back with the very final part, and that part we're going to be making his head, adding some real character to his face, and then finishing his outfit off as well with his braces and his scarf. So it's going to be really fun. So I will see you then. Have a good day. Take care.